Homage to the Triple Gem. So warm greetings everybody, this is Bhante Joe, and still here at Gendagala Aranya. Second Vasa ends in about another month and a bit, a month and a half, give or take. And first Vasa ends, I think, in about a week or so, a week and a half. And so one of the thoughts, one of the topics that has come up recently is this topic of the gift of independence. So as a young monk, you have the opportunity to meet many different inspiring monks. See, remember being a young monk, and sometimes you would kind of read about monks, like about their life, or you would read about the tradition of these monks. And then you would meet them. And you would meet monks from that tradition. And some monks actually have a very powerful presence, actually. I see, even some lay teachers. I still remember meeting my first, I guess you'd call him my first teacher with a capital T. He was a Zen teacher, and he had been a Korean monk for, I think, about 5 years, and then later became a layman, but continued to teach Zen in a kind of full-time, in a full-time manner. But as a priest, not as a monk. And I remember meeting him for the first time, and he had this extremely powerful presence. You would have to go into these interviews with him. Okay, it's extremely quite powerful presence, and he'd be about 3 feet in front of you, and you would have to kind of give these answers to these koans. And he had that presence to him. He had done quite a lot of meditation. And similarly, you hear rumors as a monk sometimes too. Being a monk, you have these this kind of a backstage pass, and you have what you like insider information. Like if you're a stockbroker, then you might know more about certain stocks or more about the details of the companies that people are trading than if you're just somebody on the street. And so in a similar way, as a monk, you get to know about the reputations of all these various monks. And some of them are extremely impressive. They have qualities that are extremely praiseworthy, extremely impressive, and extremely inspiring. And not just that, their life story is extremely inspiring, extremely impressive, extremely praiseworthy. Some of them, their life is almost like in a Buddhist sense, it's almost like a flawless life. Like they made relatively few mistakes, actually. So it's not that making mistakes is a bad thing, but it's just to say that there are caliber of people. There's really excellent and admirable people in the Sangha. And one waits to meet them, one anticipates to meet them, and one finally meets them. When meeting people like this, then there can be this sense of inspiration that comes. Oh, it's like a very heady, inspiring, and you feel you have all this energy. I'm going to go and meditate and I'll meditate tonight. An example: extra long, stay up all night and meditate. You hear about how the monks used to practice when they were young. I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna do that too. It's the sense of uplift, the sense of inspiration. So this sense of inspiration is something very, very important, but it can be confused. It can be something that's confused and becomes the ultimate reason for which people associate. So in the West, you don't see it as often, but in Buddhist countries sometimes, Buddhism is a driving force in society. And monks can become quite well known, quite famous. And again, some of the monks who are quite well known, quite famous are these extremely impressive monks. So there's sometimes quite a lot of opportunity to go from place to place and meet people. And it's a topic of conversation because everybody is Buddhist. Oh, you gave a dana, what did you do? Did you meet this such and such a monk? Yeah, I met them. And then if you meet with monks like that, then your reputation goes up. You start to seem like somebody who's a serious practitioner as a result of, the rubbing off of that sometimes. But one of the things that can happen when people associate with monks, partially, it's not always 100% for reputation, but a lot of it sometimes comes from this feeling. When one goes to meet a monk, one goes especially very, very deep into the forest sometimes to these very remote dwellings and meets a monk and has a discussion with them, it can leave one with this strong sense of inspiration, especially if it's one of these venerables whose who's highly praiseworthy in many, many ways. So the tricky thing about this inspiration is that this inspiration is a feeling. And so what it means is that as a feeling, it's not something permanent. Actually, there's a story or a sutta in the canon where the Buddha asks Venerable Rahul, he says, "Do you despise the great man from living with him often? Is the one who holds up the torch for humanity basically revered by you?" And Venerable Rahula says, I don't despise the great man from living with him often. The one who holds up the torch for humanity is basically revered by me, paraphrasing. So even for somebody who associates with the Buddha for a long period of time, that feeling wears off and it becomes something normal. The initial inspiration that one had can wear off. It comes back, it can come back, but it's not a stable thing at all. And what can happen is that when that inspiration wears off with a particular monk or a particular situation, one feels like something is wrong. And so one runs to find the next, the next hit of inspiration. So you can see people kind of doing this sometimes. They go to like one place, one monk, one place, one monk. And then when they talk about the monk, what they talk about is not what they learned from them about how to change their life. It's about that monk's life, about that monk's lifestyle. And often it's bound up with asceticism. Oh, this monk, he did this really ascetic thing. He sleeps on the rock and he doesn't, use a kuti. And, when it rains, they, go into this little hut, and then when it stops raining, come out onto the rock again. This is the most ascetic, it's definitely they're on the path to arahantship. So this kind of talk, when people talk about it like this, what it means is that they've seen a lifestyle, they've seen a mode of practice which they find inspiring, and then they can oftentimes eat that inspiration. That's the kind of phrase that sometimes comes to mind: eating the feeling, eating the inspiration. So when this happens, then people start to sometimes come up with lists about what it is that makes or doesn't make a monk or a situation good. And these lists don't have much to do with progress in the Dhamma sometimes. They have quite a lot to do with what people find inspiring. It's usually these kind of like more extreme, more rough, more hardcore practices. And this has been going on since the time of the Buddha. Now, there's not necessarily, the dhutangas are things to be revered and to be practiced according to one's character. One finds a good dhutanga, then it's good to take it on. That meshes well with one's character. It's good to take on as many as one can that are suitable for one's character. However, the key word there is suitable. It should be something that bolsters one's meditation practice. So when this becomes the case, when people start to chase inspiration, what they're essentially starting to look at is not so much what the teachings of a particular monk are doing for them in terms of changing their character. It's what the teachings are doing to inspire them. And the direction goes a different way. Instead of coming inwards to their own minds, it goes outwards to the lifestyle of that monk, which is up to him to find out whether that's effective or important. Actually, there's a really interesting event that happened in the Buddha's time, which was that Venerable Devadatta actually tried to split the Sangha with ascetic practices. And he wanted it to, he gave 5 points to the Buddha, some of which were like all monks should be vegetarian, all monks should live at the root of the tree, all monks should live in the forest, they can't live in the village. And the Buddha rejected that. And he said, those who want to, you can live at the root of a tree for outside of the rains. You can live in those who want to can live in the forest. Those who want to can go for alms. And I allow meat that has not been that one hasn't seen, heard, or suspected has been killed for one. But apparently, many lay people were inspired by Devadatta's asceticism, and many monks were too. About 500, I think, left with him, and he was able to create a schism based on these ascetic practices. Another thing that can happen when one chases inspiration in this way is that essentially what one does is one is looking for an external refuge. Excuse me. One is looking for an external refuge rather than looking for a refuge inside. And so it's like one putting all of one's weight on something outside that is actually shaky. Now, whatever results a monk has gotten from their practice, that's for them to gain. And they may have gotten results that are not shaky, that are really excellent, admirable, and inspiring results. But if a person puts the weight of their practice, the weight of their faith on the character, on the presence, on the lifestyle of a monk, they're putting their weight on something external. They're putting their weight on the presence of that monk. And that monk will not always be present. At the very extreme end, at the very least you could say, they will pass away one day and it won't be possible to associate with them all the time. So one wants to consider carefully what one's purposes are for being inspired, for seeking out people to associate with, good monks, good friends on the path to associate with. And it's not just for the sake of a feeling, it's to take on wholesome qualities. So the Buddha actually recommends, like if a person is living in a village and they see people in the village who are, I'll just adjust my seat here, who are inspiring to them, who are accomplished in virtue, accomplished in good qualities, then one should approach them and basically imitate them with regards to those qualities. And if one sees somebody who has qualities that one doesn't have, one can approach them and ask them, how did you develop this? How did you get this quality? So the purpose of associating with Kalyanamitas, with good friends, with teachers, with inspiring monks in general, is to take on the qualities that they have, to get the benefits from practice that they have gotten. And in this way, it will be a stable thing for one, more stable. It points in a different direction rather than pointing externally to something outside. It points internally. Now, this also points in a different direction in terms of what one gets interested in terms of the monks or other people that one associates with. I mean, their lifestyle is good. It's something inspiring. It's something to be admired. But what's much more interesting is what they point out to you about what you can do to improve your practice, about what you can do to gain in wholesome qualities. And some of the ways these teachers point these things out is really creative, really excellent, and leaves a really lasting impression. And that's what's valuable. To the extent that one can learn these flaws in one's character and learn how to overcome them, especially what's very good about the way these teachers point these things out is they wait and do it in such a way that one sees for oneself how one has been grabbing onto things, how one has been cultivating qualities that actually cause one to suffer. So it's when one sees this for oneself that one can make a more concerted effort to put a stop to it. And this is what's truly valuable. So when one has this in mind, I mean, the lifestyle of a teacher, the inspiration that they bring is one thing, but actually what becomes more important is whether or not there's this kind of click, whether or not there's this, you should say like a type of chemistry between that person. Human relationships are all, can be quite similar. Like, friends that one has, there's a click, there's a chemistry. If a person is married or spending like significant amount of time then with somebody else, then there's like a click. I mean, if you have friends that you don't mesh with, your personalities don't connect with, or if a husband and wife, their personalities don't connect with, don't mesh, then it's going to be a very unpleasant situation, regardless of the qualities that person has. Like whether or not your friend is successful and kind and gives to charity and is a really good meditator. If you can't click with them, if your ways of looking at the world are such that they're at odds, then associating with them is going to be a difficult thing for both of you, regardless of whether or not there's goodwill on both sides. And similarly, if one gets married, similarly, if one is working quite a lot with a boss or something like this, somebody on a team, it's good that there's this kind of click, this meshing, this chemistry. So the Kru Bhajans, they use this term, the same charit, the same character. Actually, when I was a young monk, I once asked a very esteemed monk, I was like, what's the best way that I can, more or less, what's the best way that I can you give me some advice for my monastic life? And he said, when you finish, stay under a teacher for 5 vasa, and then when you finish your 5 vasa, go off and live alone. But during vasa, come back and stay with a Kruba Ajahn with the same charit. Kruba Ajahn means somebody who's an Arya Pugala, a member of the Savaka Sangha, and stay with somebody who has the same character as you. That was his recommendation at the time. So rather than looking at the lifestyle of a particular monk and whether or not whether this feeling of inspiration comes, a more important thing is, do I have this click with this person? And in the way that they teach, does it help me to see, my own flaws? It's not something that one has to think about all that much sometimes. I mean, there can be these basic tenets, like, okay, I should be growing in wholesome qualities and declining in unwholesome ones. We should basically get along. But a lot of it is a heart quality. So when one searches for this quality, rather than solely inspiration, the lifestyle of a monk, it's important, but it fades into the background. What becomes more important is what they point out about oneself. So it goes in a different direction. The other good thing about this is that when people rely solely on inspiration, say like solely on faith in a charismatic teacher or a tradition or whatever it might be, when that teacher goes, when they leave or they have to be separated from the teacher or the teacher passes away, there can be this feeling of loss that's, it would be hard to replace that because all of one's weight is there. One has not developed the qualities oneself. But if one stays with a truly compassionate teacher, then they will be teaching one in such a way that one is developing the qualities one needs to stay on one's own. So their loss, their passing away, will not create this kind of devastation. The separation from them won't create this the same degree of feeling of like an intense loss, like an intense difficulty. So it was one of the things that the Buddha said as he was passing away. He said, there's no Tathagata, there's no closed fist for the Tathagata. I've basically taught without distinction between inner and outers. So his disciples who had understood what he had taught when he passed away, they were equanimous. This kind of, it's a loss that such a great being has passed away, but all conditions are impermanent. They're all subject to change, including the great teacher, including the Buddha. So starting from the Buddha all the way down to the great teachers of our modern age, the monks of our modern age, what they point out, the gift that they give is not so much the gift of inspiration. It's not the gift of their example is important, the gift of their lifestyle is important, but the true gift that they give is actually the gift of independence. They teach people so that those people can actually become independent, so they can stand on their own. So they actually become independent of the teacher themselves in terms of their practice, in terms of their source of happiness. As the Buddha says, one should become an island unto oneself, a shelter unto oneself. And this is a very high gift. It's basically the best gift that one could possibly get from another human being, is the gift of the Dhamma. So when we search for inspiring monks, when we meet inspiring monks or inspiring people in general, then it's good to have an attitude. It's good to have an objective for our associations with them. It's not just for the feeling. The feeling is nice, but the feeling will fade away. One can't just indulge in the feeling. That feeling is for a purpose, and it's to spur one on to try to get the qualities that they have, to try to develop what they've developed in the Dhamma. And in this way, we can get what they're trying to teach us. We can receive the gift that they're trying to teach us, which is, in basically the cases where the teachers are quite good, the gift of independence. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.